My name is Chelsea McGill. I'm the co-founder of Immersive Trails, and today I'm going to take you on a very brief introduction to Calcutta's history. The reason that the European companies were actually interested in this area is that this area, which is now North Calcutta, was a very important market for several different important trade goods. The first of which was cotton string, the second was salt, and the third was saltpeter, which is one of the main ingredients in gunpowder. The last two came from the salt lakes, which are now the East Calcutta wetlands. Another reason that this area became very important, even before the European companies arrived, was because of the Kalighat temple, which is dedicated to the goddess Kali and is a very important pilgrimage site for many people from all over India. Now, we know that the Kalighat temple came up in this area around the 1400s, perhaps earlier, perhaps slightly later, and it wasn't where it currently is. I have a representation of Kali here that we found along the riverbank. Standing next to me is one example of a final product of the idols that are made in North Calcutta in an area known as Kumartuli. Now, I'll show you a little bit more about the whole process a little later in the video. The other reason that this area became important even before the British came is this road. This is Chippewa Road. This was the main pilgrimage route to Kalighat temple from the rest of Bengal and the rest of India. In North Calcutta, you see many of these little alleyways. This is part of what makes Calcutta very charming. And something that you might see as you're walking around exploring the city is something that looks like this metal object up on the wall. Now, most people don't know this, but this is actually an old gaslight holder. So when gas lamps were first invented in the mid to late 1800s, they would come around and light this, and that indicates that this area, this specific road, this little gully, this little alleyway, was important at that time period because it was important enough to have a gas light. Bengal is famous for its sweets, and one of the most famous ones is Roshogolla. Now, I've brought you here to this place, again on Chippewa Road, where the original Bengali Roshogolla was invented by a amateur chemist who was experimenting in the kitchen and wanted to come up with some sort of sweet like this. So he ended up with the famous Bengali Roshogolla, which is very spongy and soaks up the sweet liquid that it's kept in. So now we're in Kumartuli, where the clay idols are made every year for Durga Puja as well as for all the other festivals. Now, I want to show you a little bit about the process by which they're made, because it's very interesting. The first step is this, where they make a frame out of bamboo for the idol to be put on. Then the second stage is this one, where they take straw and twine, and they make the shape of the idol, whatever it is. These are Saraswati. And over that will be put clay. So actually the inside of the idol is made of straw, bamboo, and twine. The next step is to put a rough layer of this mud mixed with rice husks onto the straw and twine image that was made. At this stage, you can see that they don't have any heads or hands or feet. And the reason for that is that those pieces are made separately by the most advanced artisan in the particular workshop. So those are made separately and are fitted later onto these. After the rough layer of clay dries, then they add another layer or another couple of layers of really smooth clay that doesn't have any of the rice husks in it. Then they let that dry, And after that is when they can paint it and put everything else on it. So it's in the smooth mud stage that they put the face and the hands and everything on. So this is one example. East India Company rule was more of a connection between the East India Company and the wealthy landowners and businessmen that were already here in this area. Now, the remnants of one of those wealthy landowners, the only thing that remains is this temple, which is in a very bad state. It's behind Kumartuli, and most people don't know about it, but it's very important because it's the only real thing that remains from the land that was owned by this important figure in Kolkata's early history. By the early 1900s, the changes in the educational status in Bengal and also the changes that came from new ideas coming in from the educational movements, from the national movement in its early days, had kind of come to a head in the protests against the partition of Bengal in 1905. After that, a lot of the very upper class, very educated, very high caste Bengalis became extremely disillusioned with the idea that change could happen in non-violent ways. And therefore, the solution was to come up with violent ways to do it. And this really surprised the British. They did not expect it because these were the people that worked in their offices, that they knew personally, and yet they were thinking about committing violence in order to bring about independence of India. This house is important because this was the headquarters of the Anushalan Samiti, which was the main organization, secret organization, that was doing this violent planning. On this side, you can see the back of the house that we just saw. That was the headquarters of the secret society of the Anushalan Samiti. And on this side, this area, which is now a cow shed, was actually the place where their gym was, where you could see people come and build and things like that. Also, very interestingly, not everybody who was part of the gym was part of the secret society. So it was literally a front for the secret society that was planning to, commit acts of violence in order to free India from the British. In the early 1800s, under East India Company rule, some of the first educational institutions came up, including one called Presidency College. Now, at Presidency College, there was a group of students who later became known as the Young Bengal movement, and they were the ones who were very counterculture. They went against the social norms and everything. One reform that happened in the mid-1800s, partially because of the Young Bengal movement and other reformers that were around, was the legalization of widow remarriage in East India Company territory in India. Now, the person who led this reform was named Vidyashagar, first widow remarriage, which happened in this house right here. Unfortunately, it's in very bad shape now, but this is where the first widow remarriage happened. And interestingly, the Young Bengal movement played a part in this. The Young Bengal movement, the members that were still alive at that time, they're the ones who were instrumental in making sure that the marriage actually happened despite the pushback from a lot of society. So this road was blocked off. There was a police cordon, and the only way that people who were coming to the marriage were allowed to come in was if they had actual handwritten invitations from Vidyashagar himself. This memorial is dedicated to those who died from the 49th Bengali Regiment who were fighting in World War I. Now, this regiment was fighting in the Turkish front during World War I, so they were mostly in what's now Iraq. One of the very important people who was part of this regiment, thankfully he didn't die, was Qazi Nazrul Islam, who was a very famous Bengali poet and also wrote very revolutionary poetry that supported the national movement. So what's now known as the Indian Coffee House and is a very important staple in any tourist itinerary and anybody who lives in the city as well, was once called Albert Hall. It was named after Prince Albert, Victoria's husband, who died when they were quite young. And this was the site of many, many important gatherings. I'll just tell you about one in particular, which was extremely important for the national movement. So this Albert Hall was the site where the Indian National Association was formed in 1876. Now, the Indian National Association, again, is something that most people have forgotten, but it was actually a really important early nationalist organization. It eventually became the Bengal wing of the Indian National Congress, asking for independence from England. And the Bengal Association was very important in terms of making sure people in the countryside got information, that there was education given to people from lower classes and all that sort of thing. So it was both a reform movement, a political movement, and also a community movement of people who were in the educated class of Bengal during the Bengal Renaissance. College Street is where the new educational institutions came up in the 1800s. And it was because of these institutions that people were able to get new jobs and work in offices and even sometimes travel to England for further studies. And it was the differences that people saw when they came back from England after they had studied between the colonial rule here and how they had been treated in England that started people to think about, maybe we should not be under British rule anymore. Maybe we should be independent, or maybe we should at least fight for our rights as British citizens here. Calcutta has a very long history of having a Chinese community here. The first Chinese community that settled in the area settled here in the late 1700s. And since then, there's pretty much been a Chinese presence in the city or nearby. Calcutta currently has 2 Chinatowns, one of which is Chippewa Bazaar, where I am standing, and the other one is Tengra. Chippewa Bazaar is known for having Cantonese clubs. This is one of them that we're standing in, Savui. And Savui Club actually is a very interesting club because they have recently put together a new Cantonese restaurant in a section of their old club. So you can come and eat Cantonese food in Kolkata and also experience the ambiance of the community here. The East India Company, as a business, needed something very important in its early days, and that was accountants, people to write letters, people to keep a note of how much money they were making. Now, these people were called writers. And hence we have the Writers' Building, which is behind me, big red brick Victorian structure. Now, this building is where the writers were housed and where they had offices as well in the early days. And later, of course, their accommodation was moved elsewhere when there were more of them and there was more work. This building and its predecessors have been the center of the government of this area since the beginning of the East India Company rule. Now, first, it was the center of East India Company rule in Bengal. Then it was the center of the British Raj, the British government's rule in India. And then, after independence, it was the center of West Bengal's government. Now, it's currently lying empty because it's being renovated, but it's a very important, very historic building. And currently you can see it in its Victorian form with red brick cladding. I want to draw your attention to this intersection here because it's a very important intersection. This road in front of the Writers' Building was extremely old and very important in the early East India period. And more importantly, the buildings on the other side of the road here were not there. That is where Fort William was, the original Fort William that the East India Company built. Now, the East India Company originally built it as a place to store their goods. It was essentially a warehouse with high walls. But in 1756, it's what Roshogolla took over when he attacked Calcutta. And in retribution for him taking over Calcutta, the British sent a bigger force, and the East India Company was able to take over the rule of Bengal and then of India at Plassey. So it was really one of the places where British colonialism in India started. The first East India Company settlement in what now is Kolkata came up in this area in what's now Halsey Square in the 1690s. Now, I've told you the reasons why Kolkata itself became a big cosmopolitan area, because of the road, because of the river, because of the trade. Why did they choose this particular area? The answer is the tank or the pond behind me. It used to be bigger. Its name is Lal Dighi, and this is one of the very few sources of fresh water that were available to them. And so the first settlers here from the East India Company decided to settle around this tank to have access to the water and to also have access to all of the trade that was happening just upriver. Halsey Square is named that because that was the name of the Governor General who saw the transfer of power between the East India Company and the British government. That transfer of power was done because of the Great Revolt, or the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. Now, when Halsey took over and when the British Raj came into power, this whole area was cleared out of residential houses and apartment buildings and things, and became the main power center for the entire Indian Empire. So that is what you see today when you come to Kolkata.